Let's see. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is our signature Gardening 101 workshop. It's a workshop that we have been offering for several years, pioneered by our executive director, Amelia LaDolce, and then constantly being improved to meet the needs of our community members. So we'll be going through some classic examples of how to plan your garden, and then a few little adjustments to help meet you guys and your needs. For those of you who are not familiar with Vines, we are a nonprofit, stands for Volunteers Improving Neighborhood Environments. We have many, many different programs. I'm not gonna be able to go into all of that in detail right now, but we do manage an urban farm in downtown Binghamton with an all-income farm share for people of all backgrounds to access fresh fruits and vegetables. We have a community gardens program, which I manage. We have 19 community gardens serving 420 something households who are gardening with us in Binghamton, with plans to build at least 2 more this year. We also have our wellness wagon program that helps bring people to the supermarket when they need it. We have a Binghamton youth program where teenagers in Binghamton get paid to learn how to garden and farm at our urban farm. We also have our Green Thumb workshop, which is what you are participating in now. Right now, are free and open to the public. But we do appreciate donations when they are available. Can everybody see my screen okay, or do I need to make it bigger?
It's not in present mode, so we're seeing the whole page.
Here we go.
There you go.
Just a little bit of housekeeping for people that might be new to Zoom. One important thing to think is, at least during the presentation, like I love that we're all interacting with each other now, and there are gonna be times where we unmute everyone so we can interact. But during the actual presentation, we're gonna recommend that you keep your video on if you feel comfortable, but please put yourself on mute. So that's in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. You'll see a microphone, and you can click that to mute yourself. That's a very good idea if you have any kind of noisy pets or traffic or children or anything that might be a distraction from the presentation. If you do want to share your video, but you don't see yourself in the meeting, you can click the little video camera in the bottom left-hand corner and show yourself. The other thing I wanted to say is that if you have questions during the presentation, there are going to be times when I'm asking you questions and opportunities for you to ask me and my team questions. Okay, I'm going to ask you to type your questions in the chat box while we're presenting. And Sarah, our intern who will be facilitating, every once in a while, she's going to remind me, hey, Christina, there are questions in the chat box. Can we refer to them? And we'll have a breakout session at the end where we'll be able to do a live Q&A with everyone. If you're in Facebook, same kind of rules apply. Just write your chats in the comments area of the Facebook Live event. And Sarah and Jabril are going to be relaying those questions to us in the chat box. So your questions will also be heard in Facebook. A big thank you to Vines and our general host in Binghamton. And of course, we will be sending you a survey over email, probably first thing tomorrow morning, asking for feedback about this workshop tonight. Any questions about housekeeping before we begin? All right, let's go. So again, Vines, we have 19 different community gardens in the Triple Cities area. Most of them are based in downtown Binghamton, but we also have some in Endicott and Johnson City, even up in Hinman and Hillcrest. And so I believe a lot of the people in this workshop right now are community garden members. but the perfect segue for me to learn a little bit more about you. So before we even get into our outline, I'm going to be sending you folks a poll. I'm going to launch the poll. You should see it pop up on your computer screen or on your mobile device. I set it up so that way you can select multiple answers. So if more than one answer applies to you, you can click that as well. But just be honest, it's an anonymous answer, and that will help me better plan the trajectory of this presentation. And if for some reason, if you can't see the poll, I'm going to read the questions out loud and you can type them in the chat box. So question number 1, where will you be gardening this 2021 season? You can select more than one answer. In a community garden, at home in a front or backyard, on a farm or homestead, in an urban area, in a suburban area, or in a rural area. The first question. Second question, how will you be gardening? You can choose more than one. Are you going to be gardening in a raised bed like we have at our community gardens? Are you going to be gardening in the ground like we have at Otsinango Garden? Are you going to be growing in a container or grow bag? Maybe you're part of the Build a Garden program from Vines, another great program that we run. How many years of experience do you have with gardening? Are you a budding beginner or are you a well-established canopy tree in our ecosystem? And then what is your budget for 2021? Are you planning to spend less than $20 on your garden this year? Are you planning to spend between $20 and $60? Are you planning to spend between $60 or $100? Are you planning to spend some other amount? What is your learning style? You can choose more than one. Do you like to draw pictures? Do you like to write ideas on paper? Do you like to draw things on the computer? Do you like to craft things with your hands? Do you like to plan things in spreadsheets or Excel? And final question, did you actually print out the packet, the one that we sent reminders about? It's a terrific resource, and we understand people do not have access to printers. So if you're just honest with me, I can gear the presentation more for what your needs are. It looks like 11 out of 14 of you have finished voting. 85% of you, 92%. Okay. And I'm going to end our poll. And I'm going to share our results just so we can all get to know each other. So it looks like 77% of us are gardening in a community garden. About half of us also plan to garden in our front yard. Most people are gardening in a suburban area. Most of us are gardening in raised beds. That's great. Although it does look like about half of us are gardening in the ground, and another third of us are gardening in grow bags or containers. Many of us are beginners. Well, this is a great place for all of us then. You came to the right workshop. Garden budget, okay? About 15% of us are going for the frugal gardening method. Another 30% plan to spend between 20 and 60. And then it looks like a good portion of us are willing to spend a little more, or at least invest a little more. We're gonna look at all different kinds of options based on your budget. What is your learning style? It looks like the winner, surprisingly, people here in this group like to plan things in spreadsheets and Excel. Well, that is very exciting. And it does look like most people did not print the packet, nor do they plan to. I will stop sharing and I will use this information. Thank you for participating in our poll. Okay, so here's the outline for our workshop. We're going to talk about how to get started with your garden in the spring. We're going to do an overview of the square foot gardening method, a terrific method developed by John Jevons that we all use very enthusiastically. We're going to talk about the important things that you need to do to maintain your garden once it's established. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks, some quick wins in the garden. In the second half of this workshop, we're going to break out into different groups and you're going to have a chance to plan your garden. We normally do this workshop in person, but because of social distancing during COVID-19, we're going to be experimenting with some online platforms and breakout sessions. So depending on the vibe and how things are going, we'll see what works for our group. So where can you grow in a community garden? Obviously you can grow in raised beds. Most of our community gardens do have raised garden beds that have many benefits. I think Bahad can probably speak about them from the ESL for Gardeners class she's been taking with us. But can anybody think of what the benefits are to raised beds? You can either type in the chat or unmute yourself. Any thoughts? Okay, so when you grow in a raised bed, first of all, at least in New York City, over 90% of the soil in New York City is contaminated with heavy metals such as lead, arsenic, and cadmium. These are toxic to the human body, particularly for young children. And so, you know, it always makes me a little bit stressed when I find people say, oh yeah, I'm in Binghamton. Binghamton has a long history of industrial production, Johnson City and Endicott as well. And so the majority of soil in this area is contaminated or has a high risk of having been contaminated. When you plant in a raised bed, particularly at a Vines community garden where, you know, we put a lot of thought into where we place our gardens, you know for sure that the soil in that raised bed is free of any kind of contamination. And that because it's elevated from the ground, the roots of your plants are not going to be pulling up any of those contaminants. The other benefit with the raised beds is that we actually bring fresh compost every single year to help give you the highest quality soil possible. You also will not need to deal with any kind of rocks or roots or the kinds of weeds that you might see if you're gardening in the ground like at Otsenango Garden. Community gardens are a great site to be gardening because we've developed them with the infrastructure of gardening in mind. So when community members propose that they'd like to see a community garden, every site needs to go through a rigorous inspection and a lot of decision-making around the proper criteria. So we're trying to figure out, is there proper access to sunlight? Is there proper access to water? Is it in a place that will actually serve the community? We do look for places that maybe are not close to a grocery store or that might need some beautification. So you have the option of growing at a community garden. And we have many, many different gardens to choose from. In fact, Sarah is going to put a little chat message with a link to register. If you are not already registered for a community garden, we do have some openings still available. So you can go to vinesgardens.org/community gardens and sign up for a garden bed. We have wheelchair accessible beds. We have raised beds and in-ground plots. They're all for about $10 to $25 per year to rent. And we do offer full scholarships to anybody who requests them. Nobody is turned away because of financial need. Container gardening is another great option. If you live in a small space, if you don't have a big front yard or a lot of sunshine, container gardening is an excellent, excellent option. We do have the Build a Garden program that you can sign up for, where we will send a team of volunteers to build a raised bed for you or a grow bag for you. Grow bags are these portable fabric containers. And they're really designed for the fact that you might need to actually move your plants around based on access to sunlight. And there are a lot of benefits to growing in containers as well. And then, of course, there's always the good old growing in the ground, growing in soil. And there are a lot of people that really enjoy gardening more along the lines of farming and actually tilling the soil and working with it, especially if you're trying to grow high volumes of crops. If you're a market gardener, if you're growing something that your community wants access to, that's also a great option. And at Otsenango Garden, we do have 20 by 20 in-ground plots that we plow and add compost and cover crops to every single year. So some things to consider before you decide to garden in your backyard, especially if you're a city grower. You need to test your soil. It's important, of course, to think about lead and other heavy metals first, because that might make you choose to go to a community garden instead of growing in your backyard. But also nitrogen, potassium, the levels of pH in your garden that can all determine what it is that you like to plant there. You need to think carefully about how many hours of sun you have on a site. So you need at least six hours of full sun every single day. It is important to think about access to water. Very, very important. So many people want to start a garden and then they don't actually have a hose. And of course, you do want to think about what kinds of pests or disease pressure you might face. So if you take a look here, we've got some examples of our raised beds. This looks like the Mather Street Community Garden. This is Laurel. This is the Laurel Avenue Community Garden. You can see that most of our beds are 4 foot by 10 foot. You can also have in-ground plots, and you see we've got Bambi right there and some really good fencing. And then we've got our container gardening. So a big question that people ask is, what can I grow in Binghamton? So Binghamton is in USDA Zone 5. These zones, if you've ever seen them, these are determined by scientists at the USDA, but it's universally recognized. And so different crops grow better in different places. We always see situations where somebody's asking me, can we grow mangoes here in Binghamton? There are certain crops that are really important to people culturally, but can't actually grow here without a heated greenhouse. So the average last frost date is between May 1st and May 10th. A lot of gardeners if you're a risk averse person, if you really want to be sure that your crops are going to make it, you might wait to transplant until Memorial Day weekend. It's kind of a big date for a lot of people. And then there is our average first frost date, kind of the close of the season when things get too cold. There are some plants that are more cold resistant than others, and we will take a look at that. And there are tools that you can use to extend the growing season that we can talk about later as well. It's important to get your seeds early. Right now, there's sadly a shortage of seeds in the United States. At least if you're a gardener, a lot of the best seed suppliers have actually limited their supply to anybody other than commercial growers. simply because there is so much, I call it panic gardening going on right now. Or not panic gardening, but the whole pandemic has gotten people to focus more on growing for their family, doing safe outdoor activities together, focusing on nutrition, and there's just been a run on seeds. However, if you are a Vines community member in whatever kind of program, including Green Thumb, you can register for our seedling list or seed request list. I think I put the link in that support document, Sarah, but maybe it's not there. But you can register. We do have seeds and seedlings available in limited supply for free to our garden members. And it kind of depends on what we have available when. But if you have a need for any particular types of seeds or seedlings, we can offer those to you. When you plant your garden, think about what it is that you actually want to eat. What's something that you enjoy? Something that you're actually going to use as a household or as a family. Another big trend that I see is that it's important to start small when you start gardening. People get very enthusiastic. They want to do 3 by 20 in-ground pots their first season. And you might feel a little demoralized if you wind up overextending yourself. So I do recommend starting smaller first and then incrementally gearing up. And then of course you do need to be thinking about fertility and compost. Okay, so about 50% of your soil should be compost. I mean, that is the ideal situation. And that is the situation in the in-ground beds. We actually have a combination of 50% garden soil and 50% compost. At a minimum, you want to be adding about 2 inches of compost per year, or some kind of organic matter per year for your plants. So that's just a general rule of thumb. And we do have composting systems at all of our gardens. So we're going to be taking a look at the square foot gardening method. We use the gardening method because it's simple. It maximizes production because the whole idea kind of takes out the guesswork out of how you actually plan your garden. So that way you can optimize your use of space. And when you're using space efficiently, there's less opportunity for weeds or unwanted plants to be competing with the crops that you want. So if you did happen to print out the packet, which, you know, here we go. You did happen to print out the packet. If you open up to page 22 of your packet, you're going to see a chart, all kinds of charts that are going to help you. This includes a seed information chart that helps you determine how many plants to plant per square foot. Okay, so, and I actually think I'm going to, it's kind of hard, like I want to get out of presentation mode and kind of show you some of the support documents. But the idea is that, so for example, if you have plants like bush beans, let's say, that traditionally on the back of your packet say need to be planted at 4-inch spacing, you can instead arrange them in every square foot of your garden so that you have, okay, I plant 9 beans per square foot in my garden. Oh, I need to plant carrots at 3-inch spacing. Well, that's just 16 carrot seeds or batches of carrot seeds planted in a square foot. Okay, or Swiss chard, if you want to plant that every 6 inches, that's like 4 Swiss chard per square foot in your garden. And sometimes when you're planning this out, it might seem kind of silly that you're going from a teeny tiny tomato. Why am I giving 4 square feet or 2 square feet to a single tomato? But the truth is that that little tomato is going to be quite large in a couple of months. And so you're kind of planning for the future. There are things that you can do with succession planting, right? So you might plant spinach or lettuce or radishes, something that matures really quickly while the other larger plants are developing. You know, a favorite combination is beets and Brussels sprouts. So maybe you'll have little beet greens growing around the base of your Brussels sprouts. By the time the Brussels sprouts get 2 feet high, you've already harvested the beets. So you're not wasting space and you're not wasting time. You're getting harvest at different times. Another important thing to think about is garden orientation. So this is something that maybe we don't always think about. But when you look at your garden, you need to decide which direction is north. And so there are many different ways to kind of figure this out. I mean, one thing I like to do, you can kind of look for where the shadows go over the course of the day. Generally speaking, in the northern hemisphere, our sunlight is coming from the south of us and traveling obviously from east to west. So any of your taller plants you would want to have on the north side of your garden. So any kind of corn or any kind of pole beans that you might be trellising, or any kind of squash or cucumber that you might be trellising, you would want to have on the north side of your garden. So that way they don't cast shade on all the other plants in your garden bed, because all those plants need sunlight to photosynthesize. So that's something important to think about. So actually, I mean, one thing that I like to do in our modern age is I like to go to Google Maps. So let's say, that's google.com. I'm going to look at the north side or the Salvation Army Community Garden, because it's one of my favorite gardens in our network. And right now we need more people to sign up there. I want to kind of showcase this. So I like to go into satellite view. And of course you can see, we actually have this whole giant lot that the Salvation Army owns and lends out to us. But here are our community gardens. And if you go into Google Maps, you know that it's automatically oriented so that way if you're setting up your garden beds, that the long side is north and the street side is south. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Any questions about garden orientation? I'm just gonna look at my little reference.
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
The garden for Salvation Army, has that been an ongoing garden or is that a new one?
That garden, I think it was established in, I want to say 2016. I have it written down somewhere. It's a really terrific garden. It's the site coordinator is Kyle Burdick. And what I love about it is that it is a really good permaculture garden, if you're familiar with that style of gardening. So out of all of our gardens, that garden, and it doesn't show it in this picture because I think that this photo was probably taken a number of years ago, but this garden has more established fruit and berry bushes than any other garden we have. It has a huge strawberry patch, blackberry patch, raspberry patches. He has planted all kinds of almonds, and there's a black walnut in the back. He's also got a lot of like comfrey and apple trees, pear trees, things like that. So yes, we do have the traditional raised beds that are designed for annual crops, the crops that you need to plant again and again every single year. But then this garden also has a lot of perennial crops, and it's right behind the Family Dollar, if you know where that is. But yeah, that's a terrific garden, and we need more people to sign up there.
Now, is there any fencing? I don't see any fencing.
There is, and we're going to talk more about fencing, but there is split rail fencing on the front and towards the side. And every single garden community makes different decisions about what kind of fencing they want to have. That's kind of a bigger conversation about community gardens and how they get developed. But you know, some gardens want a more open kind of feeling, And some gardens want higher security for their plant production. And gardens, depending on the relationship of who we are leasing from, but there are some properties that we own outright. There are others that we have a long-term lease with. So depending on what's permitted under the lease, or sometimes if something is a FEMA property, you're not allowed to have you're not allowed to have permanent structures. So all of those factors do influence what kind of fencing we have at different sites.
And is there parking near the garden? If we come with cars, where can we park?
There's plenty of street parking in that area. If you take a look, and I do want to get back to the curriculum in a second, but there is street parking all along here. I mean, this is there's plenty of street parking all through this area.
So it's the corner of Frederick Street and State?
Frederick, State, and this little Beeman Street. But yeah, it's like the entire block. And this photo only shows one portion of it. Now, this garden actually extends all the way here. And there's even an island over here of almond trees and other perennial bushes.
I never noticed it. I've been on Frederick Street and State. I've never noticed this garden.
I think it's kind of sandwiched in there, but it's a hidden gem. I highly recommend visiting and signing up.
I have to go visit it, yeah.
All right. Any other questions about garden orientation or locations before we continue going? I just want to make sure that I shared with you all the other things, because I kind of made my notes and I don't get to see them all when we're working, when I'm in presentation mode. Oh yeah. Oh yes. So when you're actually planning out your garden, it's really good to think about, well, what are the 3 things or the 5 things that you're actually going to use as a household, and keep it simple in the beginning. Yes, as you get more developed as a gardener, diversity is key to a resilient garden system. But in the beginning, get started with some simple crops, get that under your belt, and then incrementally start adding more challenging opportunities to your life. The other thing to realize is that not everything is recommended to be grown by seed. We do grow crops from transplant. There are just some plants that grow better if they're cared for in a controlled environment. They get stronger, and then you transplant them out to your garden. And we do have seedlings available. So a lot of crops, tomatoes, eggplants, cucumbers, I mean, things that have a longer season. Most people do choose to grow them inside the house or inside a heated greenhouse, just to give them a head start. You harden them off slowly. You take them out for a few hours every day until they get acclimated, and then you transplant them out into your garden, usually around Memorial Day or a little bit afterwards. And the nice thing is that if you are on SNAP benefits or other types of support, you can use your SNAP benefits to buy seedlings and starts. They do qualify for that. The other thing to think about is that thinking about space, if let's say you have a 40 square foot garden that's only 4 feet wide and 10 feet long, you might have a pumpkin that's going to take up, 4 to 6 square feet of space in your garden. Is that really the best use of your space? Same thing with onions. I mean, onions maybe don't take up a lot of space and you use them every day, but they're also really, really cheap at the grocery store. And you might want to use your premium garden space on something that is expensive at the supermarket, but higher quality, more bang for your buck in the garden. So if you think about, a fresh summer tomato grown straight from the ground, it's a lot cheaper than the grocery store and a lot more delicious, so you make these cost benefit analyses for you and your family's preferences. But these are things to think about when you have limited garden space. Crops like kale or Swiss chard, they keep producing Swiss kale is a biennial. It's going to last for 2 years. You can grow it through the winter. You can even keep harvesting. It's super nutritious and it gives all season long. some things to think about if you're thinking about the timing and when you want to transplant out your crops. We do have calendars that help guide you through when to actually plant and transplant. And given that people were telling me how much you like spreadsheets, there is a link I'll ask Sarah to put into the chat. There's a seed starting calculator. It's a very basic one. There are some more complex ones, but you can see, well, when is the best time to start my seeds, either indoors or direct sow them outdoors. When I say direct sow, that just means you're planting the seed directly in the ground when the weather is warm enough and when there's enough time, or when the soil is warm enough. And then other crops would start indoors and then transplant out as transplants. Okay. So this planning chart, it is in your handy packet on page number, I guess it's page number 27 of your packet. And so if you're the kind of person who does like to write things down, you can keep track of what it is that you're planning to plant in your garden as we start designing. If you look at the next page, you'll also see on page 24 of your packet, which I'm highlighting on the screen right now, it'll show you the crop, the depth of the seed, as in how deep it needs to go, the number of plants per square, hardiness or tenderness, that means, well, how strong is it if the weather does get cold, the ideal soil temperature, which, you know, unless you have a soil thermometer, it might be hard to determine that, but if you go by the growing zone and last frost dates, that will help you. Number of years of seeds and how long they store. So when you have a seed packet and it's actually packed for use, it has a pack for or sell by date. And what this means, oops, I think actually the next slide is about how to read a seed packet. That's the perfect kind of example. But, you know, just like any genre or any kind of text, there's certain information that's on the back of any kind of packet, you know, so it will tell you the variety, but it will also generally show you, oops. It will also generally show you how deep it needs to be planted, how much time it takes until you can transplant, days it takes to germinate, the light requirements, whether it requires full sun or if it can survive in partial sun, and then how often you need to thin your plants. There will also usually be recommendations on the actual cultural practices for caring for these plants. These descriptions are here. And then, you know, it doesn't actually show it on this. Oh, here it is, sampler. Packed for 2010, it says right here. And so what that means is that, you know, seeds, they lose their viability over time. There are some seeds that are hundreds of thousands of years old that still germinate. It's big news in the horticultural world. And then there's some seeds that kind of, the chances of them being a good, strong seed kind of decline every single year, depending on starting practices. If you are interested in learning more about storing seeds or on saving and reusing seeds on your own, I recommend that you register for our seed saving workshop. I think it's going to be April 7th with Lisa Bludnick, a local seed saver and farmer here in Binghamton. So just go to vinesgardens.org/events and register for seed saving with Lisa.
We had a question in the chat. Are there some crops that grow better in square feet or containers versus in the ground?
That's a very, that really depends on your situation. So when you're growing in containers, you have more control in some ways. Yeah, I've got a barking dog.
Can somebody please shut that dog sound? It's driving my dog nuts.
Uh-oh, yeah, I closed.
Thank you.
My fault. So I mean, a lot of plants like tomatoes or peppers or eggplants will grow great in containers. A lot of trees or perennial plants might not last as long in a container. You need to keep on increasing the size of the container in order to hold them. You also need to be aware that when you're growing in the soil, the roots have a lot more room to grow and kind of support the plant, right? So if there is a drought, that root has the potential to actually dig deeper and actually drill down deeper and access water and nutrients that if you're growing in a container, the plant roots are not going to be able to grow outside of that container, right? So you need to be more diligent as a gardener when you're growing in containers because, if you're not watering enough, that plant is not going to find it on its own. And at the same time, you have more risks also. If there's a problem with, if there is an oil spill next to the ground where you're gardening, you're at a higher risk of pollution and contamination than if you're growing in a container. So there are a lot of crops that do great in containers. I mean, I like to think of using different kinds of perennial herbs like rosemary or even cilantro or parsley, thyme, or what am I thinking of? Lavender. Those all grow great in containers. And what's great is that you can grow them and then you bring them inside in the winter time. You can keep them alive and then bring them back outside the following year. So there are plants that are perennial in certain climates that in our climate it gets just a little bit too cold. But if you grow them in a container, you can keep them and keep growing them year after year. I mean, figs are a great example of that. People actually wrap their figs in containers and bring them inside and outside during different seasons. So if you want to learn more about growing in containers, we are also hosting a container gardening workshop on May 19th. Go to it's called Container Gardening and Grow Bags and Beyond. And so that's going to be on May 19th with Hope Townsend and myself. And we're going to take a deeper dive on how to grow in containers specifically. Any other questions? Okay. Okay. So planting a chart, what plants? Oh, and if you're growing in containers, you do need to fertilize more as well. So making a compost tea or mixing fish emulsion and applying it once a month or once every 2 weeks is a good idea when you're in containers. You also need a different soil medium when you're growing in containers as well. So when you're actually planning out your garden, again, you can use transplants and just plant them out, or you can start your own seeds. And you can also order free seedlings from vines if and when they are available. There are certain seeds that you should always direct sow. These include any kind of root vegetables like beets or carrots, lettuces and beans. Generally, you just direct sow them. Beans don't really enjoy being transplanted. So again, it's recommended to grow that way. So some other ideas, if you're trying to figure out what to transplant, it's always very important to water after you transplant because your seedlings are going from a controlled environment to suddenly being out in the bigger world. You need to make sure that you water regularly. And it's always important to water at the base of your plants. Can anybody think of why that might be?
I know some plants the water will burn the leaves if there's too much sun.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's exactly it. You run the risk of either shocking the plant if it's the middle of the day, or you might wind up with some steamed vegetables, right? If you've got high sun beating down on water on your leaves, it's just like steaming your spinach in a pot. So it's always recommended that you water at the base of the plant. You also wind up having less water that's just wasted, right? You get something evaporating off the leaves where it can only minimally be absorbed, whereas actually having it percolate into the ground where the roots can get to it. So it's a much more efficient way to water. So you can actually, you have access to this. I'm not going to go through every single crop here, but you will see, this is very handy to tell you what crops are best to plant directly into the soil. So zucchini and cucumbers, I mentioned beans, corn, peas, any kind of root crops, garlic, as we discussed with Miki, you know, those are planted directly. Lettuce, arugula, potatoes, that's a fun project. Any long season crops, again, you want to start them indoors so they get a head start on the season and they can transplant them out. And you allow them to take 120 days to mature. And if you have only a certain length of harvest time or growing degree days, you need to start them indoors or buy them from a local producer who is starting them indoors for you. And then lots of other things that you could do either, right? You can start them from seed inside, or you can transplant them, you can sow them outside when you feel ready. Based on the calendar that I asked Sarah to put in the chat, you can see when is the best time. There's actually a second link that I put in there. If you're not an Excel person, I made a calendar that's specific to Zone 5, so it's more for the Broome County people among us, but you have a link to this as well. And this will show you for all these different crops, when is the best time to plant indoors, when is the best time to transplant or sow outdoors, and when your harvest windows are. So I invite you to have fun diving in and looking at this list. I think it's 5 pages long, but it's there for you to print out and use. Okay, so let's say you're lucky enough to have a Vines community garden bed. How do you actually figure out how to do square foot gardening? So there are 2 different methods I'm gonna share with you right now. I think in a regular workshop, I would demonstrate for you. This is just a short video of somebody with a British accent showing how to use your allotment using the square foot gardening method. So I'm just going to skip over the part where he promotes his books and stuff and just show you the method that you can use with string and nails or string and push pins to actually mark out a grid on your garden.
I want to show you now how to set up a square foot garden. There's lots of different ways you can do one, and this is probably the quickest and easiest. Now obviously this goes with my book on square foot gardening, which is available on Amazon as a physical book to order and read, or as a Kindle download. Now basically what you need to start with is we set this bed up in square foot areas. You can put planks of wood out, battens of wood, and do it like that. Or you can very simply do it using nails and string. Very, very easy to do. There's my hammer. So basically what we do is we measure a foot along here. So bear in mind that there's this bit of wood here, so you measure from the start of the bed. So it's about there. So all we do is bang the nail in, same going down this way, measure a foot down. Let's get another nail out. Bang that in fact, let's go all the way down. Let's just sight the nails, and then we'll hammer them in fully in a minute. 2 foot. So this bed, annoyingly, is 3 foot 3 inches, which is a little bit irritating, to be honest about it, but never mind. So just hammer those in. And basically repeat this all the way around the frame. Once it's done all the way around the frame, then we will use this and we'll put a lattice in place. You can see now the string is starting to be put in place and it's marking out the beds. Each one is exactly a square foot wide, apart from the one right at the end over there, which was slightly more due to the size of the bed. But bear in mind, I didn't make these beds. If you're making your own beds for this, then make sure the inside measurements of the beds are precisely on the foot mark, just to make it easier for you and ensure there's no wasted space. So I've dug over the soil very quickly, and see, one of the problems with this is once this lattice is in place, it's going to be hard to dig the soil. But it's a no-dig method of gardening, so all I need to do is dig in some chicken pellets or something like that, which I can scatter by hand and then use a hand fork.
All right. So, as he mentioned, what do you guys think of that method? Any thoughts?
I actually had a really successful garden that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably one of the better successes that I've had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like this is how most people would plan out their raised garden bed, and you know, you can kind of visualize once these actually lines are in place. You know, and we do have garden twine available and a staple gun available for garden members that can borrow that. Another method you can use if you're really thinking about how to space out your garden is something called a seed spacer or a seeding square. And so you can simply take a piece of cardboard, you cut it out to be 1 square foot, and then depending on the number of seeds that you want to plant, let's say you want to plant spinach or beans or beets at a 9 plants per square foot spacing, you can actually measure it out on a piece of cardboard, take your pen or pencil and basically make a hole in there. And then when it actually comes to planting time, you kind of have this template that you can actually plant seeds in. And so you have square foot and you just keep on reusing this. If let's say you don't have a ruler and you don't know how much a foot is or how much 6 inches is or 4 inches is, I like to use a dollar bill, right? So your average dollar bill is just a little bit more than 6 inches long. So $2 bills side by side is about a foot. If I know that I'm planting something at 3-inch spacing, I can just fold my dollar bill in half and use that to plant it out. If I'm going to do 4-inch spacing, I take my dollar bill and I fold it into thirds. And then you can plan out your spacing that way. So even if you don't have a ruler, you can use a dollar bill. If you don't have a dollar bill, I mean, like, what's cash these days anyway? Use your cell phone. Your cell phone is usually about 6 inches long as well. Okay, so, and if you want, you can be in the breakout session at the end where we're actually making some of these seed spacers. But that's a nice quick hack as well. And I know I'm looking at the time, we're like 5 minutes over and we haven't had a chance to actually design anything. But I just want to touch a little bit on trellising. So when you think about, what do you know about trellising, or has anybody here ever trellised before? So any thoughts?
I trellis my cucumbers. I had to look. I thought that was my picture. Just to give them more space to go up because I don't have a whole lot of ground space.
Mm-hmm. Right. And Leah's making an excellent point. If there's not enough space, especially if you're in a 40 square foot garden bed, you can start to grow vertically. So you can provide trellising in order to optimize your crop. You know, it also helps reduce certain kinds of diseases or funguses that might develop on your plants if they're touching the ground. It allows for more air circulation around your plants. You know, and there are so many different ways to trellis. You can see a few methods here where it's just, I think it's called a you know, Florida style trellis. You just take 2 poles and some wire and you send 3 wires across and let the plants will find their way up them. You can take some chicken wire or some cow fence and lean that against something, and that can work as a trellis. You can take 3 sticks and make a tripod, tie it together, and use that as a trellis. We all need a little support sometimes, so it's important to support your plants and support each other as we garden together. Fencing. Fencing is very important. I was actually going to ask, what kinds of pests are people dealing with in their gardens? Or any thoughts on pests? Otherwise, I'm going to send another poll. If nobody speaks up, I'll put a poll out.
I already sent the poll.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Now you have to vote. And you can choose more than one pest. And I know that there are way more than just these.
Last year was deer, but with my choices this year, I think it's going to be birds because I want to do more berries.
Okay, so we'll talk about that. We have 8 out of 11 people have voted. Let's give people another minute to vote. That might just be it. So yeah, it looks like a lot of us are dealing with deer, woodchucks, insect pests, which is a whole other workshop that we're offering on May 5th, Organic Pest and Disease Management. Register at vinesgardens.org/events. But there are a lot of different choices. I mean, a lot of people who are first-time gardeners enthusiastically plant, and then you really, what's delicious to you is delicious to all the other organisms living around that garden. And so a really good garden always needs some good fencing. There are a lot of different options. So knowing what kind of pest you're dealing with is important. So if you're dealing with deer, as I think it was Sarah who mentioned, it's hard for me when I'm in presenter mode, I don't see all of you. But with deer, you do need a fence that's about 8 feet tall. If you want to see the installation of a really effective and not too expensive deer fence, I want to invite you to, we have a few work days at the Davis Avenue Garden in Endwell. It's going to be April 10th and April 11th. We're going to be doubling the size of that garden due to the excessive demand. And so you can actually join us working hands-on in building an 8-foot deer buster fence. That's actually the cheapest and most effective fence we've used in any of our gardens so far. We're going to be replicating it a lot more. Another really compelling design for fighting or repelling deer is the kind of fence that we have at the Deerfield Community Garden next to Temple Israel in Vestal, that garden has what's called a double fence. So maybe you're not ready to build an 8-foot tall fence, but if you put 2 4-foot or 2 6-foot fences right one inside of the other, the deer do not like when they're looking to hop into something, visually, they do not like the appearance of 2 barricades, one after the other, and they don't go in. So you either build a really tall 8-foot fence or put one fence inside of the other and make what's called a double fence. And so if you want to see an example of a double fence, go to 4737 Deerfield Place in Vestal. That's Mickey's garden. And you will, if you're wondering, why do they have 2 fences around one garden? Well, it's to keep deer out effectively. It is called Deerfield after all. If you're worried about woodchucks or groundhogs, it's important to bury chicken wire, or if you're dealing with other rodents like rats, like we had to deal with in New York City, you might do 1/4-inch steel mesh. But it's important to bury the wire under the ground about 12 inches, 8 to 12 inches, and it's important to dig it at an angle, right? So you actually want to put it in at an L shape, because when that critter is actually digging in, if you have it bent in an L, it's when it's trying to come up, it's going to keep hitting that and it's going to give up. If it just needs to dig down and gets to the point where it can just go over, it's not gonna, and if you go to the fence building at Davis Community Garden on April 10th and 11th, you will see us doing that. You will learn how to do that with a sod cutter and everything else. So I invite you to that. And Jabril, I think, has links to that if you want to sign up for volunteering. For just a simple raised bed, Vines does offer simple netting for gophers and groundhogs that you can put around the perimeter of your garden. This plastic fencing, if you install it correctly, is very effective. It's something that's cheap and effective, and you put it right on the garden bed. You need to wrap it not like a Christmas present, but actually close up every single hole. And it winds up being a deterrent to those critters actually getting in. Now, somebody had mentioned birds. So with birds and berries, you might want to use something called exclusion netting, which they sell at Agway in different sizes. You have some exclusion netting that's designed for keeping out different kinds of insect pests, and then larger netting that's just for keeping out birds. But you might actually drape that netting over your plants or hang it on a canopy above the plants, so that way the birds cannot actually get in there. There are also instances like where people maybe plant a trap crop for the birds, like white mulberry or something that they really love in another area. So the birds go for the low-hanging fruit, for lack of a better word, and leave your blueberries alone. So that's those are some thoughts on that. Any other questions about pests? Pests and protection. Nope. Okay. Quite a few other things. Thinning out your crops is always a good idea. I mean, if you ever plant beet or Swiss chard, you're always going to see 2 little seedlings come up. And as sad as it is to do, you got to pick one. You remove one, you keep the other one, whatever one looks stronger, and you keep it in there. And it's better to thin out your carrots or thin out your beets than to have them competing with each other for nutrients and space. You know, nature designed it so that way, if you want actual sizable vegetables, you do need to thin them out. Using succession planting is a great idea. You'll see people that plant arugula or salad greens. Every 2 weeks, you sow another row and you keep on alternating, because it's going to come to a head, it's going to start to bolt, but then your next row is going to be ready to consume. And succession planting, actually thinking about, well, what am I going to harvest in May, June, July, and August in terms of using that space efficiently. In terms of companion planting, and trap crops. We're going to talk a lot more about that on May 5th in organic pest management. But a lot of people like to plant marigolds around the perimeter of their garden beds in order to deter different kinds of beetles and harmful nematodes. So marigolds are good for that. People do interplant radishes to deter flea beetles. People plant nasturtiums around the perimeter of their gardens in order to trap whitefly and aphids. So trap crops are the kind of crops that insects go to because they like it better, and it keeps them away from the crops that you want to keep. And then there are other kinds of crops that just repel these other kinds of pests. And again, you can learn more about that on May 5th. So without further ado, we're going to break out into different kind of sessions to work on some garden planning designs. But before we do, are there any questions anybody wants to ask? I know I covered a lot of material right now.
There was a question from Facebook. It's where are we getting the water from?
So in general, like, so every community garden does have water supplied by the municipality. So generally speaking, in Binghamton, it is treated groundwater. But we do have rainwater harvesting systems at a number of our gardens as well. At Binghamton, we do have we have the highest rate of snowfall this year out of any other city in the Northeast. We get a lot of precipitation, but in high summer, it is really important to keep watering your garden. And it's important to be watering deeply as opposed to shallowly. So if you're, trying to decide what's the best way to guarantee survival for my plants, it's better to water maybe, 3 times a week and water deeply than it is to come for 10 minutes a day and just kind of sprinkle, because otherwise the roots are going to be shallow towards the surface. And if you can't get there to water, they're going to die from thirst. Whereas if you're watering deeply, they're going to grow deeper roots and they're going to be more resilient when they are put under pressure. Any other questions?
Hi, yes. I mean, I know what it sounds like, but could you explain a little bit more on thinning? What is thinning crops?
Okay. So when you plant a garden bed, let's say you sprinkle beets, would be a common example, and you plant the seeds. So every single beet seed, when it actually germinates, 2 little seedlings come out. And if you want them to be successful, you would have to remove one and keep the other one there, right? Because plants that are crowded together, then they're competing against each other for the same amount of lights and nutrients. So it's kind of like, okay, if you have, let's say we have a pizza pie and there are 8 slices of pizza on that pie, right? If we're splitting that pizza between 2 or 4 people, we're good, right? But if we have 20 people trying to share one pizza, there's not enough pizza to go around for everybody to be fed, right? It's the same idea with the garden space. If you have, I saw this one garden where there were literally hundreds of tomatoes that had gone to seed in this garden bed. And it was amazing to see that many tomatoes in one place, but at the same time, they had no fruit because you had so many tomatoes in one bed that none of them had enough water or nutrients to mature and actually produce fruit. So does that make sense? Or unfortunately, I don't have a way to demonstrate. I don't have anything. You would normally wait until your seeds are actually germinating and starting to grow out. And you basically look and you see, well, which of these 2 tomato plants looks like it's going to be strongest, right? So if you think about your spacing, right? And let's say when you're planting, maybe you plant a whole bunch of, maybe you plant the bean seeds at 2-inch spacing, right? And then over time, as they're growing bigger, they're going to start fighting with each other for water and nutrients and sunlight. And so you choose one to keep and you choose one to remove. And even with beets or with other kinds of crops, you can eat what you remove, you know, but in terms of actually having a final mature product, it sounds like really competitive, but you choose one. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. And maybe what I'll do is I'll try to find some YouTube videos, and when we send the supporting documents tomorrow, maybe there'll be something there that we can share with you, a better resource for that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course, it's a good question.
We have another question from Facebook. How deep to plant the seeds? Okay.
So generally speaking, you want to plant the seeds. There's a general rule that you would want to plant the seeds about, I always get confused about this. You want to plant the seeds as deep as it says on the packet. So for example, if I've got cabbage here, you want to plant them to a 1/4 inch of depth. You know, so there is a general rule like where you would plant them about half as deep as they are long. But, you know, it's not always easy to tell that, you know, so smaller seeds generally get planted more shallowly. You can sprinkle them on top and then just put a general sprinkling of soil on top of them. Larger seeds you would plant deeper in the soil. But that information is always on the back of your seed packet. And it's different. It's different for different seeds. It's not universal. But the big thing that I usually see, the common mistake is that people plant their seeds too deep. If you plant the seeds too deep, you know, some seeds do need some amount of light in order to germinate. Other plants need a certain amount of temperature, a certain soil temperature in order to germinate. If you're planting them too deep in the soil, they're never going to get to the right conditions where they're able to germinate and actually push all the way up to the surface. So when in doubt, plant more shallowly than too deeply. Any other questions?
I don't know if I can ask a question this way. I'm not sure. How, can you hear me?
You won't hurt my feelings.
No, can you hear
me? I can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to ask about I wanted to grow something arugula. I've tried 3 years in a row, and I guess I never thin it enough because it's just like a bush, like not a bush, but they just don't get like, each plant doesn't come to its fruition. And I don't know how to, it seems like that's end up with nothing. If you thinned it that much, I'd have to take like 70% of them away after I plant them. Does that seem right?
I mean, you would probably want to thin them out about, I'm not sure of the spacing on arugula off the top of my head right now.
I think it depends on what variety of arugula, actually. So it depends. Some of them are like a little plant and some of them are like a little piece of grass. You know, I think it varies.
It would be at a 4-inch spacing. So similar to spinach and beets and things like that. But when you get arugula at the store, most of the arugula that you buy at the store is grown hydroponically. You know, it's grown indoors in commercial operations where the conditions are very much controlled. So yeah, really not, the arugula that you grow in your backyard or in your community garden is probably going to be a whole lot tastier, but it's not likely to be the same size as what you get at the supermarket because it's grown under controlled conditions.
Yeah.
You know, but the more you can kind of mimic those conditions, right? So making sure that you put them in a spot with plenty of sun, protecting them when it's cold, you know, putting some kind of cloche or landscape fabric over it during certain times in order to increase the heat. I think increasing the heat actually brings out some of the flavor in arugula if you're looking for that. you know, but the, yeah, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer.
Oh no, that's okay. You know, honestly, I used to have, I used to have all kinds of wild arugula growing in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
It was the most perfect thing, but I had it for 3 years. Like I bought some from a lady at a garage sale, and I put it in the garden, and it didn't do anything for 1 year. The next year, 3 following years, I had so much of it. It was like growing in my driveway. It was everywhere. But then it stopped. I don't know. Does that make any sense? It just stopped. Like there's no more arugula.
Let me ask you something. Where did that arugula grow best? Like
well, it grew. It used to grow, interestingly, I have like a little stone wall, and it grew like right along that wall. It'd be coming up, and it came up in between my little flagstone things around the garden. It was coming up everywhere. It really was quite, all over the place. It was, everywhere there was soil and sun.
Mm-hmm. And especially in having it grow by the rock wall makes sense, because rock walls or rocks in general, they're a solar sink. Right?
Oh,
they're holding that heat, and then they're radiating that heat even throughout the evening.
Okay, that's interesting.
That's
interesting. Okay. Well, I bought some on the internet. I bought some wild arugula seeds because I was so sad to be missing them. And I did plant them last year and nothing came up. But I think maybe I was a little too late. I'm going to try again this year. I don't know. I'll read about it to see when I should. I'm going to put them around the rocks.
Mm-hmm. And and say, like, when they fail, take photos of it and try to figure out, well, what symptoms is, and this goes for any plant that you're growing and you see it failing. There are many
that didn't even come up.
Okay, so it's not germinating at all.
Right, they just didn't germinate. Right, the ones from last year, but before that, it was just like spontaneous. There was failure. They just suddenly stopped coming, which was so weird. But you know what? They'll surprise me again some year. I don't know.
That is the hope. It's
possible.
Not an arugula expert at all, but there are.
Well, anyway,
need to take. There's a need for crop rotation, which we didn't even get into here, because that's like gardening 201, and this is gardening 101.
Well, right? Thank you. Anyway,
sometimes rest. Yeah.
Thank you for all your help, and thanks for this class. So I'll be quiet now so everybody else can talk.
You like
And there was a question in the chat, anything special we should know about soil?
Well, it's always important to test your soil. And the way that you really need to think about gardening, it's not that, like, when people use fertilizers, Miracle Grow or DAP or urea or anything like that, those kind of industrial fertilizers are designed to feed the plant. But in organic gardening, you're using nutrients like compost or like organic matter in order to feed the soil, and then the soil feeds your plants. And so, I mean, yes, solar insulation, sunlight is most important. Water is a huge limiting factor for the health and production of your plants. But soil it's the foundation of plant health. And what's nice about it too is that it's one of the things that you can fix the quickest. You might not really be able to change how much sunlight you get in an area unless you're chopping down, whatever. You can't control the temperature as easily or the environment, but you can actually build up your soil fairly quickly. So it's important to test the pH of your soil. All plants need to grow between 6.5 and 7 kind of pH, maybe a little bit higher than that for certain crops. And really, if you test your soil first, you can see what plants will grow best in that environment. So if your soil is very acidic, you might lean more towards growing blueberries or other kind of acid-loving crops, or you might need to increase the pH of your soil by adding lime or decreasing the pH of your soil by adding elemental sulfur. But without even getting into that, you can just build up your soil over time. Compost, compost, compost. That is the best way to improve your soil structure and the actual nutrient content of your soil in a way that plants can absorb. So a lot of soils in urban areas are compacted. The soil actually holds both oxygen and water for the plant roots. So you really want to improve the structure of any kind of soil that you're working in. When you're working in a garden bed or a raised bed like what we have with vines, you know, that soil is already aerated. It's already 50% compost when we build the bed. You know, so you can rest assured that it's in pretty good quality. But otherwise, you know, I recommend, you know, a bare minimum would be, you know, 2 kilos of organic matter per every square meter of space. Something I recommend a lot is putting leaf mulch in your garden beds every single, like in the fall. Tell your neighbors, please bring me your leaves, bring me your leaf clippings, lay them down, and look at how nature gardens, right? When you go into a forest, those leaves fall to the ground and they break down and turn into humus and add carbon and organic matter to the soil. You know, they're called leaves because you're supposed to leave them there. That's what a friend of mine used to say. You know, so it's important to, there's so many ways that soil is important. And actually, you take the organic pest management workshop in May 5th. We'll go into that a lot more about, well, how do you actually analyze the structure of your soil, the pH, all kinds of things like that. I actually have, you know, some charts, because based on the pH of your soil, that will determine what kinds of micronutrients and macronutrients are available to your plants, right? Otherwise, just chemically, these plants are not available. You also need to think about the cation exchange capacity of the soil. So the more clay-like your soil is, the more nutrients are bound up in it. But at the same time, those soil particles hold on to the nutrients a lot tighter. It makes it harder for plant roots to actually extract that. And of course, relationships between the different microorganisms in the soil is also really, really important. So, you know, a lot of, you know, you hear a lot about the microbiome and probiotics. See probiotics on your yogurt. Well, there's a lot of evidence that the microorganisms in the soil have symbiotic or beneficial relationships with plants, that they help plants communicate with each other, that they help plants actually extract not only nitrogen, but also lots of other nutrients from the soil. So having a living soil, using organic matter, using compost, and kind of building an ecosystem that's resilient in your garden under the soil is really important. And that can be a whole class in and of itself. Any other questions? Do people need a bio break before we do any kind of garden planning? Okay. And of course, I think we are running over time, but I wanted to show you a few different tools. So let me ask you, how many people are still in the chat right now? Because I'm in sharing mode, I can't see everyone. But there are only 8 people here. Okay, so maybe we won't break out into big groups, but do you guys want to see some hand drawing planning, or do you want to see some online planning? Okay. So in your garden packet, you did print it out. On page number I think it's on page number 20. I guess it's page number 26. You'll see a little template where you can actually start drawing out a square foot raised garden bed. And so what I started here, and I didn't actually finish, but you can actually use a straight edge and you can plan out your garden. And so figure every single one of these boxes is a square foot. If you're using a vines garden bed, you say, okay, our garden beds are 4 feet by 10 feet. So I'm going to count 4 boxes here, 10 boxes this way. And this grid is already nicely drawn out. Put this on here. It's always really important to show which direction north is. So for this diagram, I decided north is going to be this. Oh, I did. I said I'm going to do it the Salvation Army garden. But I have the orientation wrong there. But yeah, we've got, let's assume that this is north. It's always important to write the year on here, especially as you start planning your garden for different years of production and you're going to start rotating your crops. It's good to know what you planted when. From there, you might have you can use the charts that we have here. So if I'm going to build a salsa garden, because I love making salsa, I might decide, okay, I'm going to plant my tomatoes to the north of my garden. I'm going to put some tomato cages around them in order to ensure that they are properly supported. And then I look here and I say, okay, peppers can only have 1 pepper for every square foot. So I'll put in 1, 2, 3, 4 square peppers, and so on. So, and then here on page, I guess this is page 28, I can actually say, okay, I am going to be planting 2 early girl tomatoes. I'm going to plant them out on May 29th. And looking at the back of the packet, I'm going to say it's about 75 days until harvest. I'll say maybe it's a 36 by 36 inch footprint. And you can get this information from any of these charts that we have here. Okay, that's one way to do it if you like to draw by hand. If you like to play with technology, I'm going to share this with you. I'm actually going to ask Sarah to give you my login and password to a really cool program. It's called Vegetable Garden Planner. And, you know, it's not the best for really advanced garden planning, but if you're a beginner, it's a super helpful tool. So I'm going to show you how to use this. So if you garden planner, continue. Yep. Why are you doing that to me? So there are a few different, I guess, companies, Mother Earth News and Old Farmer's Almanac and a few others that all have their own garden planner. And then when you go in the back end, it's actually the same exact program. But they have a free trial that you can use to make a really great plan. So we're going to call this Gardening 101 Example Garden. And so I know that this garden bed is going to be 10 feet long and it's going to be 4 feet wide. Create plan. And when you create your profile in the program, it winds up it asks you for your zip code, and it helps you program in your actual growing zone. So if you're down in North Carolina or something like that, and your growing system is different, you can still use this tool. In this tool, it costs $30 per year, and you get 5 plans. You can make 5 different garden designs for that $30 per year. So if you get 6 friends together, or you get 5 friends together, that winds up being $6 per friend in order to make a garden design. So if I was going to make, again, I love tomatoes. So I'm going to start with this. And there's actually, when you're in the program, you can do square foot garden mode or not. So if you want to do things in square foot garden mode, you go here, square foot garden mode. You can go and you decide, okay, I'm going to put tomatoes in here. I'm going to do some large tomatoes. Okay, and let's say this is my first time planting tomatoes, and I don't know much about them. I can click the little eye icon next to the plant, and it's going to tell me all the stuff that you would see on the back of a seed packet and more. So it tells me how much sun it needs, if it's a perennial or an annual, how much fertilizer it needs, whether to direct sow or transplant. It tells you the seed spacing, and really fun, it tells you what are some good companion plants. So let's look at these companion plants and think about what grows well with tomato. You could plant marigold, broccoli, chives, mint, borage, parsley, basil, pepper, asparagus, lettuce, dill. What do you guys want to plant?
We're making salsa, right? So we need garlic.
Okay. So if you want to plant some garlic, I'll go in my search bar, plant some garlic. And you can see that I can get 9 garlic heads in a single plot. Now, do I want to put my garlic directly next to the tomato, or do we want to plant something in between? What do you want to do? Right, so maybe we can plant some garlic around the perimeter.
Okay, so if garlic was a companion to the tomato, is that going to have like a nutritional friendship, you know, soil wise? You know, like the tomatoes gives off this, the garlic picks up that, kind of like the Three Sisters version.
Yeah, that's a really great way to be thinking about it, Leah. So like the garlic has a different growth habit than tomato. It's more of a root. And so it's not going to be competing with the tomato for space or for sunlight. It also has a lot of what we call phytochemicals. That stinky smell that you get from garlic can actually deter certain kinds of pests. So anything in that garlic or allium family is really great. So we can plant those around here. Just keep in mind that we're going to plant garlic at a really different time from tomato. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Let's choose one more crop to go in this, and then I'll show you a really cool tool.
Someone on Facebook said pepper.
All right, let's find some peppers. Regular sweet pepper or chili pepper? What do we want? Hot salsa or mild? Hang on.
Sweet.
Sweet pepper, okay. I like it spicy, but we'll put some peppers in here. I'm gonna put a few, just one hot pepper for me. What else do we need for chili, for our salsa? Any kind of aromatic herbs.
Cilantro.
Very good. You're a superstar. A star student. Thanks for playing. Okay, so we'll put some cilantro in here, and the cilantro is excellent. It's an aromatic plant that's actually going to distract different kinds of pests. And what's neat about this software, okay, let's say we're halfway finished. Now, if I want to go to my plant list, I can click plant list, and it's going to give me a calendar that shows the number of seedlings I need for this garden plan. It's going to tell you when you might need to start it indoors, when to transplant outdoors, and when to harvest. So when I said, oh, garlic, we're going to be planting that at a really different time, because according to the calendar, when do we plant garlic?
The year before.
Yeah, the year before or next year, right? Maybe you just got your garden bed. When's the best time to plant garlic? Yesterday and today, right? So, but we might kind of plan for it and say, okay, well, I know that I'm going to be planting garlic in October. So whatever I plant in that space should be something that that I will definitely be done harvesting by October. So we might actually go back to that plan and say, you know what? I'm going to optimize my space, and I'm going to put cilantro in these spaces right now. And I know that I'm going to plant and harvest cilantro through June, July, and August and September. And then in October, I'll pull out that cilantro and I'll start planting my garlic. So you see how we're using this space efficiently, using the succession planting. Yeah, so we got salsa. What else do we like to eat? What other ideas we got?
Kale, Christina.
Yeah, I'm glad you spoke up. So let's say we do want to grow some kale. So let's find it. Bahad, how much do you love kale?
Maybe 2 or 3, I don't know.
Let's put in. Let's put in a row of kale.
And cucumber or Armenian cucumbers.
You said cucumbers, okay.
Yeah.
So let's think about this for a second, because if we're trellising, the cucumbers are going to grow up. They're actually probably going to be taller than the tomatoes. So maybe what we need to do is move all of this over. And we'll put our cucumber on that north side. And then when you're thinking about cucumber, well, what grows well with cucumber? If you don't know, let's look at our good companion plants. They say nasturtium, lettuce, radish, tomato, dill, tansy, marigold, oregano, sunflower, and beans. So what do we want to plant here?
Maybe beans.
Okay, let's do it. Let's do some beans. Do you want dry beans, whole beans, fava beans? What kind of beans?
I don't know, Christina. Maybe you should.
Let's do a mix. Let's mix them all together. So we'll do some pole beans that we'll put on trellises along. Maybe if we put a trellis down the middle here, and this is actually cool too. You can go into the parts list. Oops, plant list, plan. Right now we're just looking at plants. We can put a trellis in here. Bean trellis. We can put in a bamboo bean trellis. But I really understand that. So we actually put up a trellis, and so the cucumbers can climb on one side of the trellis and the beans can climb on the other side of the trellis. So we can be growing vertically. And then something I insist, if you're growing cucumbers, you need to grow dill. Especially if you're making pickles. And they'll reseed themselves every year, and they help keep away cucumber beetle and other kinds of pests that affect the cucumbers. So this is already looking like a really great design. What I like about it so far, just very naturally, is that all of these plants are coming from different families. Right, we have a block of plants here that are from the Solanaceae or the nightshade family that we can rotate every single year, every single season, growing in one area. We've got some of our cucubids here, some nitrogen fixers here. It's interspersed with aromatic herbs that can distract predators and other kinds of pests. And of course, we got our leafy greens. What else do we want to plant?
Some marigolds, just because I like them.
I like them too, Leah. So plant some marigolds. And we can totally play around with this a little bit. In fact, if you kind of put them around the perimeter, that can help distract different kinds of pests. So I actually think that's a really good idea. It's not only about what you eat, although another great crop to protect our kale would be some of that nasturtium. So these are flowers that are very beautiful, but you can also eat them. So I always like to plant nasturtiums around my garden bed, and I just throw them in my salad, or if I have guests, I'll decorate my cakes or my salads with them. They're wonderful. You know what we forgot? We forgot the arugula. We really need some arugula for Sarah. We're gonna add some arugula in a nice sunny spot to the south. So we'll get the best sun. And we can plant these in succession. So actually I like my salads, some beets and arugula. And these are great because you can kind of alternate them and they all go great in salads together. All right, so looking at this, is there anything we want to add or change to this garden before we sign off at 7:30?
I just think that it didn't occur to me, but now seeing it in the program, I think helps. Like until we put the arugula in there, I'm not gonna want to bend over my flowers to pick my arugula every week. So that's just like an extra added bonus of the program over maybe the simplicity, we'll say, of a pencil and paper. Because it didn't occur to me until I saw there just how difficult that would be come harvest time.
Yeah, and I love this program because it is so easy to play around. And in our digital world, like especially we saw how many people tonight did not have printers to print out the packet, which is totally understandable. But this is something that you can even go out to your garden site and yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second because it's not letting me change my camera. There you are. Okay. What I love about this is that you can kind of play around with it, and you can go there with your cell phone and actually play. Like there's a cell phone version or a tablet version of this same program, and you can play around with it there if you have data in that area or Wi-Fi that reaches your garden. You know, and this program works offline. When I was in Ethiopia in a place where you got 7 kilobytes per second of streaming of any kind of internet, I could load this at a place that had internet and then take it out to different kinds of fields and I could play with it. And then when I came back to internet, I could save, which is very important. This is not Google Docs. It does not save automatically. You do need to go to this symbol that I hear a lot of young people do not know what it is. You need to go to the symbol to the floppy disk and save it.
My daughter thinks it's a backpack. Yeah.
It's a backpack? Wow. You know, things, the things kids say these days. But, you know, I really love this program for beginner gardeners. If you can afford $30 a year, I find it, and you share it with your friends, I find it's a really worthwhile investment. And I've done it with young people. If kids are working on a project and they're designing a garden together, they can do it in this program. It's not the same as Google Drive because you can't be working at the same time in real life. But if you're in a Zoom meeting, let's say, you have one person sharing their screen like I just did, and then other people talking together about what they want to see in the garden and where. And then you have this great tool. And, you know, we're always like going on Google. Google is a gardener's best friend. Finding companion plants. Well, if I don't know what a companion plant is for beets, I can at least go here and find a lot of information in one place to guide my decision making, and I can play around and really think about what I want. And there are plants in here that, you know, I take a look at, and I've never, you know, if you actually go to the full plant list, if you're not searching, you know, Agastache, Ageratum, those are new plants to me. I do not know those plants, and I've been doing this a while. So there are great ways to actually learn about different kinds of crops and how they grow together. So I do love this program. And you know, that other video showing how to set up a garden bed, if somebody wanted to send me their own video about what they did in their garden and you send it to me for vines to use for educational purposes, I will gladly share my program with you if anybody wanted to do that. And of course, the plant list is here. It updates. Show summary. There used to be a way, I guess they don't have it anymore, which is fine. But you can, this is good for planning. Oh, look, you can actually decide, well, what do I need to plant first? Right? You can filter it like you would in Excel. So you can say, okay, well, I should be sowing my tomatoes indoors now. And, you know, I could have been planting my kale before, or I can direct sow them in April, May. Right, so this is a wonderful tool. And I saw most people said that they were willing to spend between 40 and 60 or 20 and 60. This is a worthwhile investment, especially if you can get free seeds and free seedlings from vines. Any other questions? Questions, comments, suggestions, ideas? Well, I guess that's it. If people want to, thank you so much for joining us. Vines Community Gardens, our Gardening 101 workshop. I think there's only a handful of us left. If we want to stop streaming on Facebook and just hang out a little in Zoom, I'd be happy to do that. Answer people's questions informally. And, you know, a big thank you to Amelia LaDolce, our executive director who developed this curriculum. A big thank you to Sarah and Jabril, our intern and program assistant who helped with the technological aspects of tonight's workshop. And thank you all of you for coming and having such great questions and enthusiasm about gardening.
Thanks so much, Christina.
Yeah, thank you for sitting with me for
Thank you.
After you've been on Zoom all day.
No, it was great. Thank you.
Leah, it's so great to see you.
I've been all emotional the whole time learning about gardening, but I'm just so glad to see your face and talk to you directly.
I mean, like, it sounds like you know a lot already, and that maybe we could learn a lot from you.
It's trial and error. I find that I'm in the South now, so the sun does things that it didn't do when I was in New York. Our soil is a lot more sandy clay, which I didn't think was a thing until I got down here. But there's no such thing as learning too much. I've got a notebook full.
Well, it's really great to see you and to see your children also.
Listen, sometime we'll have to do it when you're not teaching me stuff.
Yeah,
but yeah,
I would love to catch up. I really would, and hear more how your life is going. And like really,
there's a reason that I'm glad for the mute button. My life sounds a lot like Disney stories and children screaming, but yeah, you know, we'll have to get together.
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about that kind of thing right now. Trying to decide whether to go that path or not. So I'll have to pick your brain on that.
Yeah, feel free to call me. I'll turn the camera around and you can see the mayhem.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what else to.
Is it just me and you?
No, Bahad is here and Sarah's here.
Hello, everybody else. I'm trying to spy, but I can't see anybody else.
You gotta hit it. So if you go to view you can hit gallery view. Right now, I think it's on speaker view. This is gallery view.
Christina, is it finished?
It's finished.
Okay.
The after part.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's so productive. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope
have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. I have a quick question before you end, Christine.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm so new to this. I don't know what I'm doing, but I wanted to ask you, so if I had some question, like a puzzling thing, like I don't want to like bother everybody, but can I send you a little email or something, or like how could I do that?
Yeah. So you
like, or a text, or you just said that I should I made my trellises all on the west side, and now I think I should move them to the north because I want beans and cucumbers.
Yeah, there you go. I'm glad that you started.
I got to move them thanks to you. So I'm gonna have to
I love you.
Bye bye.
No,
sorry, I didn't want to bother everybody.
Oh no, she's like my best friend from middle school.
Oh my gosh, that's so nice.
She moved to North Carolina, and I haven't seen her in like 20 years.
Wow, and you got
Facebook.
Cool.
Last minute that I was running, and we were on the same canoe racing team with Girl Scouts.
Oh gosh, that's so nice. Don't you love that? Wow.
That's the amazing thing about Zoom and like the pandemic is that, you can connect people all over.
Oh, that is a really good thing that I have not taken advantage of, but I mean, at least you encourage me. That's right.
Well, that's really great. And I just put my email in the chat box, and I don't
even know what a chat box is. I believe it or not. Like, what do you mean by chat box? I'm trying to figure that out.
In the bottom center of your Zoom window,
yes,
there's a little talk bubble that says chat.
I don't know. I just see 3 dots. Oh. Then it says mute, stop video, share content. More.
A cell phone as opposed to a computer?
No, yeah, I'm on a cell phone.
It's a little bit different on a cell phone.
Or see, that's why it always gets me confused.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Don't worry about it.
Did you get
I'll figure it out? I know your email because you sent emails to me.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Those emails go to me.
Yeah, I'll just, if I have an urgent question, like I guess I am going to move my trellises, so that kind of changes everything. But I'm going to do the square foot thing because I always overcrowd my garden, and I know that I do. And you reminded me that I have to plant my tomato seeds that I harvested from the farmer's market this year because I love those tomatoes. So I'm going to try to do, I've never done from seed tomatoes, but I have to get busy, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, now is the time. Keep in mind that we also at Vines have a lot of free tomato seedlings. Here that you can just get for us for free. And
sorry.
Like if you're growing at home, you really need to have good light.
Good what?
Good light. Good like.
Oh yeah. Well, I have a plot, but I'm planting some things here.
No, I mean for the seeds.
I think I have a very good place. I have a really sunny place. I can, I think I can do it.
I support you in trying.
But it's not so. I know it's so hard.
And then the other thing is that with tomato seeds, you usually want them to kind of ferment inside of the tomato before you save them.
Okay, I didn't do that.
Yeah.
He told me I could just sit them in water. Like if I take them out of the tomato and put them in water for a couple days or something. But anyway, I guess it might not work. Okay, thank you.
That would help.
Thank you for a reality check there, because I okay.
Try it. Nature does it all the time.
I know, but I kind of messed with nature because I took it out of the tomato and ate the tomato, and I just had the little seeds, and I soaked them, and then I dried them.
You should sign up for our seed saving workshop on April 9th.
I don't know that I'll ever do that again, but I really hope that I'm going to plant them. I have a really sunny place. I have some seed starter soil. I'm going to try it right in my little sunroom here. I'll try. Yeah, I'm going to try. It would be nice. I always have a lot of tomatoes, but I'd like to have really special tomatoes because these are really special tomatoes. So I'll try.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And how do I find out when I can get seedlings? Or it won't be for a while now, I'm sure. But
so every email that I send you.
Okay, I should look on there.
In the email signature.
I'm sorry. What was that?
At the bottom of every email I send you, there's the email signature. And it says, please send checks to PO Box 3104. If you need volunteers at your garden, click this link. If you need supplies, click this link. There's another link that says, I need to request seedlings. And thank
you. Thank you for telling me.
I put it in my email signature because people never know where that information is. And I'm like, it's literally in every email I send.
You know what? Thank you for pointing it out to me because I'm not even very good about looking at my email. So that is my bad, but I will look at all my Vines emails and I'll look at that because I'm really excited about having a garden even more than the other years. So
I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I'm gonna really, and I'm so happy Bahar is there. We're gonna have a good time. I don't see a single other person when I'm gardening. I go down there. Almost every day.
When do you? I mean, when I go, there's always somebody there. There's not always though. There's 24 hours in a day, or 12 hours, whatever, of sun for 8 hours. So I don't know. Yeah. And then do you get? I guess I just asked. You get the emails about when we have volunteer days and things like that.
Yes. Last year I had a car accident right in the beginning of the season, so I couldn't help build that fence, which I felt so badly about. Literally the day they started building the
trellis, yes.
I literally was in a car accident, so I was like, it ruined the rest of my summer for strong activity. But I am all better, so I'm going to be able to volunteer. You know what? Can I just talk?
Yeah.
Okay. So the thing that I really love that you were saying how that one down on State in Frederick Street, how they have like a continuing garden, like a perennial garden. Mm-hmm. We could do a little bit of that on Park Avenue, couldn't we?
Yeah. So actually,
to help, to even be responsible for watering